The Volanthi Empire had conquered over 300 species across the galaxy, and not one of them had ever posed a real threat to the ancient rulers of the stars. Queen Saretha the Eternal sat upon her crystalline throne aboard the flagship, called the Minion's Grace, watching the small blue planet grow larger on her viewing screen. "What do we know of these creatures?" she asked her advisors. "They call themselves humans." "Majesty," replied Admiral Vecthos, his four eyes scanning the data streams before him. "They possess no faster-than-light travel, no plasma weapons, no hive mind coordination, and no psychic abilities whatsoever." The Queen tilted her elongated head and let out a soft laugh that echoed through the command chamber. "Another primitive species," she said with absolute certainty. "This conquest will take perhaps 10 rotations at most." The Volanthi Armada descended upon Earth like a storm of fire and light, and the humans looked up at the sky with terror in their hearts. Cities burned within hours as plasma beams cut through buildings like hot knives through soft fabric, and millions of humans ran screaming through streets filled with smoke and death. The world governments tried to fight back with their missiles and their jets and their tanks, but every weapon they had was useless against the Volanthi shields. By the 5th day, most of the major cities had fallen, and by the 8th day, the human military forces had been scattered into small pockets of resistance. On the 11th day, Queen Saratha declared victory and ordered her occupation forces to begin the standard process of subjugation that had worked on 300 worlds. Before this one, she returned to orbit, satisfied that another species had been added to her collection, and she did not think about the small blue planet again. This was her first mistake on the 12th day. Something changed. Commander Kale Rennick had been a Special Forces operative before the invasion, a man who had spent 20 years learning how to fight in the worst conditions imaginable. Then the aliens came. He watched his entire unit die in the first wave of attacks, and something inside him went cold and hard like steel forged in the hottest fire. He did not surrender, and he did not run, and he did not hide. Instead, he began to hunt. The Volanthi soldiers were tall and strong, with 4 arms and skin like gray leather, and they moved through the ruined cities with the confidence of conquerors who had never known defeat. They did not understand what was happening when their patrols started disappearing. At first, it was just 1 or 2 soldiers who never returned from their rounds, and the commanders assumed they had simply gotten lost in the unfamiliar terrain. Then entire squads began to vanish without a trace, and the Volanthi started to feel something they had not felt in a very long time. Rennick moved through the shadows like a ghost, striking fast and disappearing before anyone could react. He learned their language by listening to their communications, and he learned their weaknesses by studying the bodies of the ones he killed. The Volanthi needed to sleep for 12 hours every cycle, and during that time they were completely helpless. Their armor had a gap at the neck joint that a knife could slip through with ease. Their 4 eyes gave them excellent vision, but they could not see in complete darkness the way humans could with their special equipment. Rennick shared everything he learned with the other survivors, and slowly the scattered resistance cells began to connect and coordinate. A woman named Sarah Chun organized the survivors in what remained of Shanghai, turning the underground tunnels into a fortress that the Volanthi could not penetrate. A former Marine named Marcus Webb led raids on alien supply convoys in the American Midwest, stealing weapons and food and medicine. An engineer named Yuki Tanaka figured out how to modify human radios to intercept Volanthi communications without being detected. And everywhere, the humans began to whisper a name that gave them hope: Rennick. The Volanthi commanders sent reports back to their queen, speaking of a pest problem that was proving difficult to exterminate. They did not want to admit that they were afraid, so they used words like minor setbacks and temporary resistance and expected difficulties. But Queen Saretha was no fool. and she could read between the lines of their careful reports. She summoned Admiral Vectos to her throne room and demanded answers. "Why is this taking so long?" she asked, her voice like ice cracking on a frozen lake. "The humans are proving to be more stubborn than anticipated." "Majesty," he replied, keeping his eyes lowered in submission. "They refuse to accept defeat, even when defeat is the only logical outcome. Then make them accept it," the Queen commanded. "Burn their hiding places and salt their fields, and show them what happens to species that resist the Volanti Empire." The Admiral bowed and returned to Earth to carry out her orders. But he did not understand what he was truly dealing with. The Volanti had conquered species that were stronger than humans, faster than humans, smarter than humans, and more numerous than humans, but they had never conquered a species that possessed what humans called spite. When the Volanti burnt the forests where the resistance fighters hid, the humans moved into the sewers and the subway tunnels and the abandoned mines. When they poisoned the water supplies, the humans learned to purify rainwater and dig new wells. When they killed 10 humans for every Volanti soldier that died, the humans just fought harder and more viciously than before. Rennick stood in the ruins of what had once been a beautiful city, surrounded by the survivors of his latest battle, and he looked up at the stars where the alien ships orbited. "They think this is almost over," he said to his people. "They think we are about to break." He picked up a weapon taken from a dead Volanti soldier and checked its power levels. "Let me tell you something about humans," he continued, his voice carrying across the silent crowd. "We do not break, and we do not bend. And we do not forget." He pointed at the sky with the alien weapon. "They came to our home, and they killed our families, and they burned our cities. And they think we will just accept this, because we are small and weak and primitive." His eyes burned with a fire that had been lit on the first day of the invasion, and had never gone out. "They have made a terrible mistake, and we are going to make them pay for it with everything they have." The humans around him raised their weapons and cheered, and the sound echoed through the ruins like thunder far above, in her throne room among the stars. Queen Saratha heard reports of another garrison destroyed, another supply line cut, another commander killed in his sleep. She did not yet understand what she had awakened when her ships came to Earth, but she would learn. They would all learn. 5 years had passed since the Volanti Empire first came to Earth, and the war that was supposed to last 11 days had become something far worse for the alien conqueror's commander. Kale Rennick was no longer on Earth. He had stolen a Volanti warship in a raid so bold that the Empire refused to believe a human could have planned it. And he had taken the fight into the stars themselves. Commander Tyreth was young for a Volanti officer, barely 300 years old, and she had been given what her superiors called an easy assignment: find the human and kill him. Admiral Vectos had told her, "He's just one primitive creature in a galaxy of billions, and he cannot hide forever." Tyreth had accepted the mission with pride, believing that she would return as a hero who had ended the human problem once and for all. That was 2 years ago, and she had failed to catch Rennick more times than she could count. She sat in her command chair aboard the hunter ship Void's Edge, staring at the latest report from the planet Kalos 9 with growing horror. An entire garrison of 5,000 Volanti soldiers had been wiped out in a single night. The human had attacked during the sleep cycle, using weapons that the garrison did not even recognize. He had freed the slave workers, armed them with stolen Volanti rifles, and disappeared before reinforcements could arrive. How is this possible? Tyreth whispered to herself as she read the details of the attack. The human needed sleep, just like the Volanti did. But her spies reported that he had been seen on 3 different worlds in the same week. Always fighting, always killing, always moving. It did not make sense. Her second in command, a scarred veteran named Drothax, entered the command chamber and stood at attention. "Sub-Commander, we have received new intelligence," he said. The human was spotted at the Shroud Nebula communications array 6 hours ago. 6 hours ago? Tyrith repeated, her four eyes widening. But that is impossible. He was reported on Kelos 9 just yesterday. The reports are confirmed, Sub-Commander, Drothax replied. Either the human has discovered faster than light travel that we do not know about, or there is more than one of him. Tyrith felt a chill run through her body, despite the warmth of the command chamber. She had studied everything the Empire knew about humans during her 2 years of hunting Rennick. And what she had learned disturbed her deeply. Humans were weak compared to most species, with soft skin and fragile bones and short lifespans of less than a century. But they had something that no other species seemed to possess in such abundance. They called it willpower, and it allowed them to push through pain and exhaustion and fear in ways that defied all logic. Rennick had been shot 17 times, according to medical scans recovered from battles. And he was still fighting. He had survived in vacuum for nearly 2 minutes when his ship was breached. And he had still managed to kill the boarding party that came for him. He learned new languages in weeks instead of years. And he adapted to new weapons and tactics faster than the Empire's own soldiers could. Set course for the Shroud Nebula, Tyrith commanded. Maximum speed by the time they arrived. The communications array was a field of burning debris, and Rennick was long gone, but he had left a message, painted on the largest piece of wreckage in bright red letters. You cannot catch what you cannot understand. Tyrith stared at the words and felt something she had been trained to suppress since childhood: doubt. The months that followed were a nightmare of failed pursuits and humiliating defeats. Rennick struck the prison moon of Vex and freed thousands of political prisoners from a dozen different species, giving them weapons and ships and a cause to fight for. He destroyed the fuel depot at Kara Station, crippling the Empire's supply lines in an entire sector. He assassinated Governor Meltos of the Outer Reaches, walking into a heavily guarded palace and walking out again without a single witness who could describe how he did it. And everywhere he went, he left that same message in different forms. We are coming. You started this war, but we will finish it. Humanity remembers. Tyrith collected every piece of information she could find about the human, trying to understand how one creature could cause so much damage to an empire that had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years. She learned that Rennick had lost his wife and daughter in the first wave of the invasion, killed when a plasma beam struck their home while he was away on a military exercise. She learned that he had spent the first 3 days of the occupation digging through rubble with his bare hands, hoping to find them alive. She learned that when he finally accepted they were dead, he had not cried or screamed or collapsed. He had simply picked up a weapon and started killing. And he had not stopped, since he is not fighting to win. Tyrith realized one night as she studied his pattern of attacks. He is fighting because he cannot stop, because stopping would mean accepting what he has lost. This understanding did not help her catch him, but it did help her predict where he would strike next: the prison station at Titan, one of the moons of a gas giant in a system the Empire used for storing dangerous criminals. Rennick would not be able to resist freeing more prisoners and adding them to his growing army of rebels. Tyrith gathered 500 of her best soldiers and set a trap that she was certain would finally end the hunt. She was wrong. The battle lasted 6 hours, and when it was over, Tyrith's forces had been reduced to less than 50 survivors. Rennick had turned the prison station into a killing ground, using the narrow corridors and maintenance tunnels to negate the Volanthi advantage in numbers. He had fought hand-to-hand when his weapons ran out of power, killing 3 soldiers with a piece of broken metal before stealing their rifles. He had saved a young alien child caught in the crossfire, carrying her to safety while still firing at the Volanthi with his other hand. And when the battle was over, He had walked out of the main airlock into the light of the distant sun, covered in blood and burns and wounds that would have killed any Volanthi 3 times over. Tyrith watched through her surveillance drone as he looked directly at the camera, with eyes that held no fear and no mercy. "Tell your queen I am coming," he said in perfect Volanthi, the language he had taught himself in the ruins of his homeworld. Then he boarded his ship and flew away, leaving Tyrith surrounded by the bodies of her soldiers and the ruins of her career. She returned to the Empire in disgrace, expecting to be executed for her failure. Instead, Queen Saratha summoned her to the throne room and asked her a single question: "What is he?" Tyrith thought about everything she had seen and everything she had learned, and she gave the only answer that made sense: "He is human, Majesty." And that is something we should have feared from the beginning. The queen dismissed her without punishment, which was somehow worse than death. It meant that the Empire had no idea what to do about the human threat. And that terrified Tyrith more than anything else. Somewhere in the darkness between the stars, Rennick was gathering his forces and planning his next move. The war was just beginning. The word spread through the enslaved systems like fire spreading through dry grass, passing from ship to ship and world to world until every conquered species in the galaxy knew the name Rennick, the human who had defied the Volanthi Empire and survived the ghost who struck from the shadows and vanished like smoke, the warrior who could not be killed no matter how many times they tried on the crystal world of Krethnos. The silicon-based beings known as the Kreth heard the stories and felt something stir in their ancient memories. They had surrendered to the Volanthi 8,000 years ago, accepting their fate as miners and builders for the Empire because resistance seemed pointless. Now their council of elders gathered in their deepest cavern to discuss whether the time had come to remember what they once were on the ocean planet of Diluvius. The aquatic beings, called the Diluvians, listened to the tales brought by traders and refugees, and they began to whisper in their underwater cities. They had been conquered 5,000 years ago, their great fleets burned and their warriors executed, and they had sworn to never fight again. But the stories of the human made them remember their own legends of heroes who had died rather than submitted on the dark moon of Morthan. The psychic beings known as the Morthani reached out with their minds and touched the dreams of the human fighter. Curious about the creature that had caused such chaos, what they found surprised them. Rennick did not dream of victory or glory or revenge. He dreamed of a small house on a green hill, and a woman with kind eyes, and a little girl who laughed as she chased butterflies through a garden. He dreamed of peace, and that was why he could not stop fighting until peace was possible. Again, the Morthani elders wept when they shared what they had seen, and they sent a message to Rennick, offering their help one by one. The conquered species began to reach out to the human, who had proven that the Volanthi could be beaten. Rennick met with their representatives in secret, on hidden stations and abandoned worlds, and he listened to their stories of loss and suffering and shame. The Kreth ambassador was a being of living crystal named Vorath, ancient beyond measure and wise beyond words. "Why do you continue to fight?" Vorath asked the human during their first meeting. "The mathematics are clear. The Volanthi have 10,000 ships, and you have perhaps 50. They have trillions of soldiers, and you have thousands. Victory is impossible." Rennick looked at the crystalline being with eyes that had seen too much death and still burned with unbroken fire. "We do not calculate the odds of victory," he said. "We calculate the cost of surrender, and for humans, that cost is always too high." Vorath was silent for a long moment, light refracting through his crystal body in patterns that showed deep thought. "My people once felt the same way," he said finally. 8,000 years ago, we fought the Volanthi with everything we had, and we lost everything because of it. Did you lose everything?" Rennick asked. "Or did you give everything away when you stopped fighting?" The question struck Vareth like a physical blow, and for the first time in millennia, he felt the echo of the warrior spirit that his ancestors had possessed. "What do you propose?" Vareth asked. Rennick smiled, and it was not a pleasant smile. "I propose that we remind the Volanti why they were afraid of us in the first place. The Coalition of the Broken was born in the cargo hold of a stolen freighter, with representatives from 12 species who had once been enemies and were now united by their hatred of the Volanthi Empire. Rennick stood before them and spoke in simple words that needed no translation. "Have all been told that resistance is useless," he said. "You have been told that the Volanthi cannot be beaten, that their technology is too advanced, their numbers too great, their empire too old and too strong." He looked at each representative in turn, meeting their eyes or eye equivalents without flinching. "They lied to you." He activated a holographic display that showed a map of the galaxy, with Volanthi territory marked in red. "The Empire is vast, but it is also stretched thin," he continued. "They have to guard 1,000,000 worlds and patrol 1,000,000,000 trade routes and suppress 300 conquered species. And they do not have enough ships or soldiers to do all of this at once." The map changed to show weak points in the Volanthi defenses, supply lines that were vulnerable to attack, communication networks that could be disrupted. "We do not need to defeat their entire fleet," Rennick said. "We need to make them bleed so much that they cannot afford to keep fighting. We need to show the galaxy that the Volanthi can be hurt, that they can be beaten, that they can be afraid." The Diluvian representative, an eel-like being named Asara, raised a tentacle to speak. "And what happens when they bring their full might against us?" she asked. "What happens when they stop trying to suppress us and simply decide to exterminate us instead?" Rennick nodded, acknowledging the question as valid and important. "Then we make extermination cost them more than they are willing to pay," he replied. "The Volanthi are conquerors, not destroyers. They want slaves and resources and tribute. If we can convince them that we are more trouble than we are worth, they will have to negotiate. And if we cannot convince them?" Voreth asked. "Then we die fighting," Rennick said simply. "And we take as many of them with us as we can. And we become a legend that will inspire the next generation to continue the fight." The room fell silent as the representatives considered his words. Finally, the Mothani elder, a being of shadow and whispers named Soleth, spoke directly into everyone's minds. "I have seen this human's dreams," Soleth said. "He does not fight for himself. He fights for a future he may never see, for children who may never be born, for a galaxy where no one has to live in fear of the Volanthi. This is not madness. This is hope." One by one, the representatives pledged their support to the coalition. The Kreth would provide technology and engineers, using their ancient knowledge to build weapons that the Volanthi had never seen. Diluvians would offer their remaining ships and their expertise in naval warfare, learned in the deep oceans of their homeworld. The Morthani would share intelligence gathered through their psychic abilities, spying on the Volanthi without ever being detected, and the other species would contribute whatever they could, from soldiers to supplies to safe harbors where the coalition could hide and heal within a year. The coalition had grown from a desperate alliance to a force that the Volanthi could not ignore. They struck at targets across the Empire. Using tactics that Rennick had developed during the occupation of Earth, they fought in ways the Volanthi could not predict, combining the strengths of different species in ways that had never been tried before. A Kreth engineer would modify a human weapon to fire through Volanthi shields, and a Diluvian pilot would deliver it to the target, and a Morthani spy would ensure that the enemy never saw it coming. The Empire reeled under the assault, and for the first time in 10,000 years, the Volanthi knew what it felt like to be hunted. Queen Saratha received reports of defeats that should have been impossible, losses that should have been unacceptable. And a rebellion that should have been crushed years ago. She stared at the name that appeared in every report. The name that her soldiers had learned to fear. The name that had become a symbol of everything the Empire could not control. Rennick, she whispered the word to herself in the darkness of her throne room. And she felt something cold settle in her heart. The human was coming for her. And she was not certain that anything could stop him. The throne room of the Valanthi Empire was the largest enclosed space in the galaxy. A chamber of crystal and gold that could hold 100,000 subjects beneath its vaulted ceiling. Today, it held only the War Council, the greatest military minds the Empire had ever produced, gathered to discuss what they called the human problem. Queen Saratha sat upon her throne and watched her admirals and generals argue with each other, each one certain that they had the solution, each one unwilling to admit that they had failed. We should increase patrols along the trade routes, Admiral Vectos was saying. Cut off their supply lines and starve them into submission. We have tried that for 3 years. General Crethan replied with contempt in his voice. They simply steal what they need from our own convoys. Your patrols have become their supply depot. Then we should launch a full assault on their bases, another admiral suggested. Burn every world that harbors rebels and make an example of the survivors. We do not know where all their bases are, Crethan said. The Morthani hide them from our sensors, and every time we destroy one, 2 more appear somewhere else. The arguments continued as Saratha listened in silence, her 4 eyes watching her commanders reveal their weakness with every word. They were afraid the greatest warriors of the greatest empire the galaxy had ever known were afraid of one human and his ragtag alliance of broken slaves. Enough, she finally said, and her voice cut through the noise like a blade through silk. The chamber fell silent instantly. Every Valanthi present bowing their heads in submission. You have all failed to solve this problem, the Queen said. You have all told me that the human is just one creature, just one primitive species, just one minor threat that will soon be eliminated. She stood from her throne and descended the steps until she was standing among her commanders, towering over them despite their own impressive height. And yet here we are, 7 years after the invasion of Earth. And the human is still alive, still fighting, still winning. No one dared to respond. I want to know why, Saratha continued. I want to know what makes this species different from all the others we have conquered. I want to know why our strategies that have worked for 10,000 years are failing against creatures who cannot even travel between stars without stealing our ships. A voice spoke from the shadows at the edge of the chamber, old and thin and trembling. I may have an answer. Majesty. The War Council turned to see a figure shuffling forward. Bent with age and wrapped in robes of ancient design, it was the Keeper of Records, a being so old that no one remembered his true name, whose only purpose was to guard the sealed archives of the Empire's founding era. Speak. Saratha commanded. The Keeper bowed as low as his ancient body would allow. What I'm about to share is forbidden knowledge. Majesty, he said, it was sealed away by your ancestors 10,000 years ago, deemed too dangerous for anyone to remember. I did not ask for a history lesson, the Queen said impatiently. I asked for answers. This is both, Majesty, the Keeper replied. The answers you seek are hidden in the history you have forgotten. He raised a trembling hand and activated a holographic display that showed images older than anyone in the room had ever seen 10,000 years ago, when the Valanthi Empire was young and still expanding. We encountered a species on the edge of the galaxy, the Keeper said. They were primitive by our standards, confined to a single world, still fighting among themselves with weapons of metal and fire. The images showed a small blue planet orbiting a yellow star, and the War Council recognized it immediately. Earth, Admiral Vectos whispered. Yes, the Keeper confirmed. We made first contact with the humans 10,000 years ago, long before any of you were born. Long before the current dynasty came to power, Queen Saratha felt ice forming in her hearts. What happened? She demanded. The keeper's voice grew even more quiet, as if he was afraid that the words themselves might cause harm. We tried to conquer them, just as we tried 7 years ago, he said. We descended upon their world with overwhelming force, expecting an easy victory. The holographic display changed to show images of battle, Volanti ships burning in the sky, Volanti soldiers falling to human weapons. The war lasted 100 years, the keeper said. 100 years of fighting against a species that should have been defeated in days. 100 years of losses that we could not afford. 100 years of watching the humans grow stronger with every battle while we grew weaker. The War Council listened in stunned silence. They learned to use our own weapons against us. The keeper continued. They captured our ships and figured out how they worked. They studied our tactics and found ways to counter them. They turned every defeat into a lesson and every victory into a stepping stone. He paused, and the weight of ancient grief seemed to settle on his shoulders. By the end of the war, the humans had developed their own faster-than-light travel, their own plasma weapons, their own fleet of ships built from the wreckage of our armada. How did the Empire survive? Saratha asked. Though she was not certain she wanted to know the answer, we did not defeat them. Majesty, the keeper said, we made a deal. A bargain that saved our species from extinction. The holographic display showed a meeting between Volanti leaders and human representatives. The terms of a treaty being discussed, we agreed to leave their world and never return. And in exchange, they agreed to stop their attacks on our empire. But our ancestors knew that this peace would not last. They knew that the humans would eventually come for us again. So what did they do? Saratha asked. They cheated, the keeper said simply. They introduced a plague into the human population, a disease that affected only their minds. It erased their memories of the war, of us, of everything they had achieved. The images showed humans collapsing, forgetting, looking up at the stars with confusion instead of recognition. We destroyed their ships and their weapons and their technology, and we left them stranded on their world with no memory of what they had once been. We seeded their cultures with stories of gods and monsters to explain the gaps in their history, and we hoped that they would destroy themselves before they could remember. The keeper looked at the queen with eyes that held 10,000 years of fear. We hoped they had forgotten what they were. Majesty, Saratha stared at the ancient hologram of humans reaching toward the stars with primitive rockets, rebuilding everything that had been stolen from them. And have they forgotten? She asked. Though she already knew the answer, the keeper gestured at the tactical display that showed Rennick's fleet approaching the outer defenses of the throne world. No. Majesty, he said, they have remembered. And the human who leads them fights with the same fire that nearly destroyed us 10,000 years ago. The throne room was silent as the War Council absorbed the truth that had been hidden from them since birth. They had not conquered Earth 7 years ago. They had woken something that should have been left sleeping. What do we do? Admiral Vecthos finally asked. His voice small and afraid. Queen Saratha returned to her throne and sat down, her 4 hands gripping the armrests until the crystal cracked beneath her fingers. We prepare for the reckoning, she said. And we pray to whatever gods might listen that the humans have mercy, because we showed them none. The War Council dispersed to make their preparations, but everyone present knew in their hearts that nothing they did would be enough. The humans were coming, and they had 10,000 years of vengeance to deliver. The fleet of the Coalition of the Broken emerged from hyperspace above Volanthi Prime like a storm of vengeance that had been 10,000 years in the making. Commander Kale Rennick stood on the bridge of his flagship, a vessel called Remembrance that had been built from the wreckage of 100 Volanthi ships. and he looked at the planet below with eyes that held neither hatred nor joy, only purpose. All ships. Report status. He commanded. The responses came from across the fleet in a dozen different languages. Kreth and Diluvian and Morthani and human and more. All united in this final moment. The Volanti defense fleet is moving to intercept, his tactical officer reported. They outnumber us approximately 10 to 1. Rennick nodded as if he had expected nothing else. Signal all ships, he said. Today we do not fight for victory. We fight for justice. We fight for freedom. We fight for everyone who was ever told that resistance was useless. Show them that it was not. The coalition fleet surged forward to meet the Volanti armada, and the Battle of Volanti Prime began in the 10,000 years since humans had last challenged the Empire. The Volanti had conquered 300 species and won countless wars, but they had never faced an enemy like this. The humans fought with a fury that defied all logic, throwing their ships into impossible maneuvers and accepting losses that would have broken any other species. The Kreth engineers had modified the coalition weapons to bypass Volanti shields, and the crystalline shells punched through enemy armor, like fists through paper. The Diluvian pilots moved through the battle with grace learned in the deep oceans of their homeworld, predicting enemy movements before they happened. The Morthani used their psychic abilities to coordinate the fleet, allowing them to move as one entity, while the Volanti commanders struggled to maintain order. And at the center of it all was Rennick, directing the battle with the same instincts that had kept him alive through 7 years of war. The Volanti fleet began to crumble under the assault ships that had never known defeat burned and broke apart, their crews screaming in languages that the coalition did not understand and did not care about admirals who had conquered. Entire systems found themselves outmaneuvered by slaves who had been told they could never fight back, and slowly, inevitably, the coalition punched through the defensive lines and reached the throne world itself. Ground assault teams. Prepare for deployment, Rennick commanded. All ships. Provide covering fire. He left the bridge and walked to the shuttle bay where his personal squad was waiting. Humans in Kreth and Diluvians standing shoulder to shoulder. You do not have to come with me, he told them. This is personal, and I would not ask anyone to risk their life for my revenge. The Kreth warrior Varath stepped forward, his crystal body glowing with inner fire. This is not revenge, Commander, he said. This is liberation, and we would not miss it for anything in the galaxy. Rennick allowed himself a small smile, the first genuine expression of happiness he had shown in years. Then let us finish this. The shuttle dropped through the atmosphere of Volanti Prime, dodging anti-aircraft fire and enemy fighters, until it crashed through the roof of the royal palace in an explosion of glass and metal. Rennick was the first one out, his weapon firing before his feet touched the ground. The palace guards were elite soldiers, the best the Empire had to offer, and they fought with the desperation of beings who knew that failure meant the end of everything they had known. It did not matter. The coalition assault team cut through them like a blade through grass, moving deeper into the palace with every passing minute. Rennick led the way, following the map that the Morthani had placed in his mind, until he reached the doors of the throne room. Wait here, he told his squad. This last part I must do alone. He pushed open the doors and walked into the chamber where Queen Saratha the Eternal sat upon her crystalline throne. Surrounded by the bodies of her personal guards, she had a weapon in her hand, but she did not raise it as the human approached. So you are Rennick, she said, a voice calm despite the chaos outside. I have heard much about you, and I have learned much about your empire, Rennick replied. About what you did to my people 10,000 years ago. About the memories you stole and the future you tried to erase. The queen inclined her head in acknowledgement. It was necessary for our survival, she said. Your species is too dangerous to be allowed to reach the stars. We had no choice. There is always a choice, Rennick said. You chose fear and cruelty and theft. And now you face the consequences. Saritha rose from her throne and descended the steps until she stood before the human. Close enough to touch, what do you want? She asked. Wealth beyond measure. Territory to call your own. A seat on the Imperial Council. Name your price, and I will pay it. Anything to end this war. Rennick looked at her with eyes that had seen too much suffering to be impressed by offers of power. We want what you took from us, he said. Our future, our stars, our right to exist without your permission. The queen spread her 4 hands in a gesture of surrender. Then take them, she said. I will order my fleets to stand down. I will sign whatever treaties you require. I will give humanity everything it asks for. Rennick studied her face. Searching for deception and finding only fear. And what of justice? He asked. What of the billions who died in your conquests? The species who were enslaved? The worlds that were burned? Justice is expensive, Saritha replied. Revenge is satisfying but ultimately pointless. If you destroy the empire, you must rebuild it. And you will become what we were, conquerors and tyrants ruling through fear. She played her final card with the skill of a being who had survived 10,000 years of political intrigue. If you kill me, you become the monster that your children will one day have to fight. Rennick stood in silence for a long moment, and the queen watched him with desperate hope. Then he holstered his weapon. Saratha's 4 eyes widened in shock. No, Rennick said. We become what we always were, survivors, protectors. And a warning. He turned and walked toward the door, then stopped and looked back over his shoulder. You will step down from your throne, he said. You will free every enslaved species in your empire. You will pay reparations to every world you have conquered. And you will live the rest of your very long life knowing that you only survive because humanity chose to be better than you. And if I refuse? The queen asked. Then we will return, Rennick said simply. And next time, we will not be merciful. He walked out of the throne room, leaving the most powerful being in the galaxy standing alone in the ruins of her power. The war ended that day. Though the work of building a new galactic order took many years more, the coalition of the broken became the foundation of the free. A republic where every species had a voice, and no one would ever be conquered again. The Valanthi Empire fragmented into democratic states, each one working to undo the damage of 10,000 years of tyranny, and the humans took their place among the stars. Not as conquerors or rulers, but as guardians who would stand against anyone who threatened the innocent. 50 years later, on a quiet Earth that had healed from its scars and now thrived as the heart of a peaceful galaxy, an old man named Cale Rennick sat on the porch of a small house on a green hill. His hair was white and his body was worn, but his eyes still held the fire that had driven him through a lifetime of war. His grandchildren played in the garden below, chasing butterflies and laughing in the warm sunlight. And he watched them with a smile that held no shadows. A young reporter had come to interview him for the anniversary of the liberation, and she asked him the question that everyone wanted to know. Do you have any regrets? Rennick thought about his wife and daughter, lost so long ago that their faces had become blurred in his memory. Thought about all the people he had killed, and all the friends he had lost, and all the dark nights when he had. Wondered if any of it was worth the cost. Then he looked at his grandchildren playing under an open sky, free and happy and safe. No, he said finally. I fought so they could have this, and they have it. That is enough. The reporter left, and Rennick sat alone as the sun began to set in schools across the galaxy. Children learned the story of the human who had defied an empire and changed the course of history in barracks and academies. Soldiers studied his tactics and tried to understand how one man could accomplish what entire armies could not. And, in the quiet corners of every civilization, there was a saying that parents whispered to their children and rulers, whispered to their advisors, "Do not wake the humans." Cale Rennick closed his eyes and listened to his grandchildren laughing. He had fought for this moment his entire life, and it was everything he had hoped it would be.